Hi everyone, it's John. Welcome back to my channel. You might remember, I think the last time I told anyone about a book sale was back in February when Princeton University Press, whom I've mentioned probably dozens of times on this channel, had a book sale where they had 50% off of much of their catalog. And I showed you the first part of what I got back in February. And for the past 6 or 7 months, the rest of what I got has just been sitting here on my dining room table while I try to work up the energy and or interest to show you the rest of the books. And today's the day. Lucky you. I think I have 14 or so books left. Many of these books I don't know too much about. Let me see it. There we go. Many of these books I don't know too much about, other than the way I vet them is if they look interesting online, and if I go to Goodreads and they have a relatively good rating, which is usually somewhere at least around a 4.0 out of 5 stars. There's some wiggle room depending on how much I'm interested in them. But if you look interesting to me and you have a good rating, I'm one of those people that will just go through. If there's 5,000 books on sale, I will look at every single book and get pretty. There's a little bit of vetting that I do at the end of the day when my cart's full, but I'll get most of what looks good to me. It's just one of the few indulgences that I do book-wise. So I try to not limit myself too much. It only happens 2 or 3 times a year anyway. So I'll just tell you about what I got that I haven't shown you already. And like I said, I don't know a lot about most of them, so I'll either read you the back material or the inside cover in the case of hardbacks. So the first thing I got was by Jonathan Bate, and this is How the Classics Made Shakespeare. It's kind of self-explanatory, but I will read you the back. Ben Jonson famously accused Shakespeare of having small Latin and less Greek, but he was exaggerating. Shakespeare was steeped in the classics. Shaped by his grammar school education in Roman literature, history, and rhetoric, he moved to London, a city that modeled itself on ancient Rome. He worked in a theatrical profession that had inherited the conventions and forms of classical drama, and he read deeply in Ovid, Virgil, and Seneca. In a book that combines stylistic brilliance, accessibility, and okay, so here you get the PR speak. Brilliance, accessibility, and extraordinary range, acclaimed literary critic and biographer Jonathan Bate, one of the world's leading authorities on Shakespeare, offers groundbreaking insights, of course they're groundbreaking, into how, perhaps more than any other influence, the classics made Shakespeare the writer he became. I'm pretty sure that Jackson Bate also wrote a biography of Samuel Johnson 10 or 15 years ago, which I'm almost certain I have, but have not read. Next up are a couple more books, the first 1 or 2 of which I showed a while back, and they are a series of books that Princeton Press puts out called Lives of the Great Religious Books. And they'll just, many of them are from the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, and the quote-unquote New Testament. And what they'll do is they'll just take a single book from the Bible and just write a mini book on its composition, how old scholars think it is, how it's been used in religious practice, how it's inspired art, artists, composers, things like that. Just sort of a dive into each book. And they get really, really great, smart scholars to do this. For example, this one's by Joel Bodden, who is at Yale Divinity School and is one of the big time sort of scholars when it comes to the Old Testament in the United States. In fact, I know someone who took who either worked with him or maybe even went to graduate school with him. I don't know, but they got him to write their entry in the Lives of the Great Religious Books on the Book of Exodus. So my big interest lately has been, well, when I get around to going back to reread it all, it's going to be just a complete reading of the Hebrew Bible. I have the Robert Alter translation waiting for me with all of that big gigantic 3,000 page 3-volume one. It's sitting in the room right adjacent to me, and one of these days I want to reread it, but also read these side by side. And I also have something else Bible related here as well. But this is the one for the Book of Exodus. There's also the Book of Songs. I'm not as familiar with Alana Pardes, if that is how you pronounce her name, but she is a professor of comparative literature at Hebrew University of Jerusalem. But this is the Song of Songs. So I think that makes 4 or 5 of these books that I have now. Next up is they had someone translate with some Japanese tales of Lafcadio Hearn, and then tacked on an introduction by Jack Zipes, who is mostly known for his work in fairy tales. Lafcadio Hearn has been published. He now has a volume in the Library of America. Lafcadio Hearn lived in Japan for several years and wrote many kinds of stories and also journalism about his time there around the turn of the last century or so. Let's see, next up is a biography of Chaucer, and this is Marion Turner's Chaucer, A European Life. I don't think I read you the back of the Lafcadio Hearn, but we'll skip that for now. There's plenty of other things to talk about. Chaucer is often called the father of English literature, but this acclaimed biography reveals him as a great European writer and thinker. Uncovering important new information about Chaucer's travels, private life, and the circulation of his writings, Marion Turner constructs in unprecedented detail the cosmopolitan world of Chaucer's adventurous life, focusing on the places and spaces that fired his imagination. From the wharves of London to the frescoed chapels of Florence, the book recounts Chaucer's experiences as a prisoner of war in France, as a father visiting his daughter's nunnery, as a member of a chaotic parliament, and as a diplomat in Milan. At the same time, the book offers a comprehensive exploration of Chaucer's writings. The result is a landmark biography and a fresh account of the extraordinary story of how a wine merchant's son became the poet of the Canterbury Tales. And quite a long biography for someone who lived so long ago. It's nice to know that we have the source material for such an extensive biography. All right. Next, this is I reread the Discourses on Livy several years ago, and I'm just sort of drawn to anything that is about Machiavelli that people are writing, and this may be of limited interest to most people, but this is John P. McCormick's Reading Machiavelli, Scandalous Books, Suspect Engagements, and the Virtue of Populist Politics. And is advertised as a new reading of Machiavelli's major works that demonstrates how he's been previously misread. To what extent was Niccolo Machiavelli a quote-unquote Machiavellian? Was he an amoral advisor of tyranny or a stalwart partisan of liberty? A neutral technician of power politics or a devout Italian patriot? A reviver of pagan virtue or initiator of modern nihilism? Reading Machiavelli answers these questions through original interpretations of Machiavelli's three major political works, The Prince, the Discourses, which are the Discourses on Livy, and the Florentine Histories, and demonstrates that a radically democratic populism seeded the Florentines' scandalous writings. John McCormick challenges the misguided understandings of Machiavelli set forth by prominent thinkers such as Jean-Jacques Rousseau and representatives of the Straussian and Cambridge schools, and he emphasizes the fundamental, often unrecognized elements of a vibrant Machiavellian politics. Advances fresh readings of Machiavelli's work, this book represents a new outlook on how politics should be conceptualized and practiced. So, a revisionist account of Machiavelli. I was so glad to hear that someone else mentioned this in a recent video, and that someone happens to be Hannah from Hannah's Books. Her last video, or perhaps second to last video, was completely devoted to Gilgamesh. And I think she not only looked at several translations of Gilgamesh, but also looked at some critical work that helped shed light on not only the differences in translations, but just sort of helped, better understand the themes. And one of the things that's so difficult about Gilgamesh is that it's so far removed from us in time. It is sometimes difficult to try to inhabit the mind of the person who wrote it, whoever that might have been. And this is Princeton's it's sort of like a Life in the Great Religious Books, even though I'm not sure they ever really considered the Epic of Gilgamesh a religious book when it was written. But Gilgamesh is partly divine, I think. This is the life of a poem, Gilgamesh, by Michael Schmidt. And Hannah had really wonderful things to say about it. So sort of makes me all the more interested in eventually reading it. I think I want to wait to read it until I actually reread Gilgamesh itself, because I think there's some details about it that I would like to be refreshed on before I read this. But when and if I ever do that, I will have this by its side. And a rare instance in which I picked up the other book that is advertised by the author on the cover, and didn't know that he actually did, I guess, more sort of scholarly publication with Princeton, but this is certainly by them. This is Christopher Clark, who also wrote The Sleepwalkers, which is a book about how Europe got itself involved in World War I. And this is Time and Power, Visions of History in German Politics from the 30 Years' War to the Third Reich. And it's not very long. It's all about 225 pages. So this might, maybe if I have time for it, I've committed myself to one long book to read with Stephanie, and maybe whoever else might want to read that with us. Post-War by Tony Jute. That's going to be our read together for November and December. And maybe, there's at least 2 other things that I've promised Princeton that I'll get back to them about as well. One of them is gigantic, and the other one's not tiny. So I have at least 3 things, and so if I have time, this might be an interesting thing to look into. Okay, we're more than halfway there, I think. This is The Last Utopians by Michael Robertson, 4 late 19th century visionaries and their legacy. I will read you the inside. For readers reared on the dystopian visions of 1984 and The Handmaid's Tale, the idea of a perfect society may sound more sinister than enticing. And this lively literary history of a time before Orwellian entered the cultural lexicon, Michael Robertson reintroduces us to a vital strain of utopianism that seized the imaginations of late 19th century American and British writers. The Last Utopians delves into the biographies of 4 key figures: Edward Bellamy, William Morris, the artist, Edward Carpenter, and Charlotte Perkins Gilman, who you probably recognize as well, who lived during an extraordinary period of literary and social experimentation. The publication of Bellamy's Looking Backward in 1888 opened the floodgates of an unprecedented wave of utopian writing. Morris, the arts and crafts pioneer, was a committed socialist whose News from Nowhere envisions a workers' Arcadia. Carpenter boldly argued that homosexuals constitute a utopian vanguard. And Gilman, a women's rights activist and author of The Yellow Wallpaper, wrote numerous utopian visions, including Herland, a visionary tale of an all-female society. These writers, Robertson shows, shared a belief in radical equality, imagining an end to class and gender hierarchies and envisioning new forms of familial and romantic relationships. They held liberal religious beliefs about a universal spirit uniting humanity. They believed in social transformation through nonviolent means and were committed to living a simple life rooted in a restored natural world. And their legacy remains with us today, as Robertson describes in entertaining first-hand accounts of contemporary utopianism, ranging from Occupy Wall Street to a radical fairy retreat. I'm not such a big fan of when people try to import contemporary political causes into a study of writers and artists and intellectuals from a different century. I think that can sometimes be a little bit heavy-handed and maybe overtly political. I just want to read about them. Leave out the Occupy Wall Street stuff. Leave out all that stuff. I just want to read about them. So the degree to which that sort of infects and permeates the book, I don't know. But if and when I get back to it, I will let you know. This is Visions of Empire, How 5 Imperial Regimes Shaped the World by Krishan Kumar. And this is advertised as what the rulers of empire can teach us about navigating today's increasingly interconnected world. It was the co-winner of the 2018 Barrington Moore Book Award, Comparative and Historical Sociology section of the American Sociological Foundation. The empires of the past were far-flung experiments in multinationalism and multiculturalism, and they have much to teach us about navigating our own increasingly globalized world. Visions of Empire sheds critical new light on their rulers, who they were, how they justified their empires, how they viewed themselves, and the styles of rule they adopted towards their subjects. Krishan Kumar provides panoramic and multifaceted portraits of 5 major European empires: the Ottoman, the Habsburg, the Russian/Soviet, the British, and the French, showing how each, like Rome itself, like ancient Rome, saw itself as a carrier of civilization to the rest of the world. This compelling book argues how the rulers of empire, in their quest for a universal world order, left behind a legacy of multiculturalism and diversity that is uniquely relevant for us today. So, big, broad strokes in the description. Maybe the actual text itself will present something a little more interesting. I think when Peg from the History Shelf showed her books, we had a few overlapping books, so I don't mean to give you too many repeats. That's definitely going to be the case when I show you my books from Yale, which I plan to also film today, as soon as I end this. This is one of those Zone books, which was bought up by or is affiliated with Princeton University Press, and they tend to be sort of niche books about a topic that are sometimes really, really interesting and really good. So this is The Great Lakes of Africa, 2,000 Years of History, translated by Scott Strauss, and originally by Jean-Pierre Chrétien. And the back says, through the genocide of 1994, though the genocide of 1994 catapulted Rwanda into the international stage, English language historical accounts of the Great Lakes region of Eastern Africa are still scarce. Drawing on a wide range of sources, from colonial archives, oral tradition, archaeological discoveries, studies in anthropology and linguistics, and his 30 years of scholarship, Jean-Pierre Chrétien offers a major synthesis of the history of the region, which encompasses Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, the Eastern Congo, and Western Tanzania, a region still plagued by extremely violent wars. This new translation brings the work of a leading French historian on the region to an English-speaking audience for the first time. The Great Lakes of Africa, 2,000 Years of History, first retraces the human settlement and the formation of kingdoms around the sources of the Nile, which were discovered, quote-unquote, by European explorers around 1860. Chrétien then describes these kingdoms' complex social and political organization and analyzes how the colonizers, German, British, and Belgian, not only transformed and exploited the existing power structures, but also projected their own racial categories onto them. And finally, the author shows how the independent states of this post-colonial era, in particular Rwanda, Burundi, and Uganda, have been trapped by their colonial and pre-colonial legacies, and the racial rewriting of the latter by the former. Today, Chrétien argues the Great Lakes of Africa is a crucial region for historical research, not only because its history is particularly fascinating, but also because the tragedies of its present are very much a function of the political manipulations of the past. So, there you go. And here's that other Bible-related book. It's actually an anthology of essays. Just want to verify that before I lie to you. Yes, it's essays by different writers. This is the Hebrew Bible, a critical companion edited by John Barton. So I'm not sure how much, well, I'll read it to you anyway. This book brings together some of the world's most exciting scholars from across a wide variety of disciplines to provide a concise and accessible guide to the Hebrew Bible. It covers every major genre of book in the Old Testament, together with discussions of major themes such as human nature, covenant, creation, ethics, ritual impurity, sacred space, and monotheism. It is an authoritative overview that sets each book within its historical and cultural context in the ancient Near East, paying special attention to its sociological setting. It provides new insights into the reception of books and the different ways they've been studied, from historical critical inquiry to modern advocacy approaches such as feminism and liberation theology. It includes a guide to biblical translations and textual criticism and helpful suggestions for future reading. So basically, stuff that I can use to further aid my rereading of the Hebrew Bible when I get there. So, two more. The first of which is The Music of Time, Poetry in the 20th Century by John Burnside. And I'm not the biggest poetry reader, to be honest. Excuse me. But reading about poetry, about poetry's lives, and about poets' thoughts on reading and the art of being a poet, those are more interesting to me. So let me see. Yeah. Poetry helps us make sense of our world, transforming what the Russian poet Osip Mandelstam called the noise of time into a kind of music. The Music of Time is a unique history of 20th century poetry by one of today's most acclaimed poets, blending incandescent personal meditations with rare insights about a broad range of poets who distilled the essence of the moment, gave voice to our griefs and joys, and shaped our collective memory. Bringing together poets from times and places as diverse as Tsarist Russia, 1960s Harlem, and Ireland at the height of the Troubles, Burnside reveals how poetry responded to the dramatic events of the century while shaping our impressions of them. He takes readers from the trenches of World War I to a prison cell in Nazi Germany, and from Rilke's grave in the Swiss Alps to Dylan Thomas's Welsh seaside. His luminous narrative is woven through with insights into the poet's creative process, as well as lyrical and thought-provoking digressions on topics ranging from marriage to the Kennedy assassination. A spellbinding work of literary history, reveals how poets engage with the most important issues and events of the 20th century and bears personal witness to the beauty and power of an art form unlike any other. So, yeah, that's poetry adjacent enough for me. And one last book. So sorry for taking up 30 minutes of your time, but you may have seen this. Peg, did you get this from Princeton? Let me know. This is their relatively new biography of Dante, which appears to be on the scholarly side, which should come as no surprise, considering who published it. But it looks like it is going to be an education for me. Someone who has only read the Divine Comedy and Vita Nuova and tiny parts of it's escaping my mind at the moment. But this is their new biography of Dante by John Took. And it is also every bit of 550 pages or so. But some of the pages look like this, with half of it is footnotes. So, all right, the inside. For all that's been written about the author of the Divine Comedy, Dante Alighieri, who lived from 1265 to 1321, remains the best guide to his own life and work. Dante's writings are therefore never far away in this authoritative and comprehensive intellectual biography, which offers a fresh account of medieval Florentine poets and life and thought before and after his exile in 1302. Words are hard. Beginning with the often violent circumstances of Dante's life, the book examines his successive works as testimony to the course of his passionate humanity. His lyric poetry, through to the Vita Nuova, as the great work of his first period, the Convivio, this is the one I read, the De Vulgari Eloquentia, and the poems of his early years in exile, and the Monarchia and the Commedia as a product of his maturity, describing As it does a journey of the mind, the book confirms the nature of Dante's undertaking as an exploration of what he himself speaks of as maturity in the flame of love. The result is an original synthesis of Dante's life and work. So, I absolutely had to get this. Would love to reread it in conjunction with some more Dante, but I'll probably just reread it as a standalone book. So, that's the second installment. I was thinking about breaking this up into 2 parts, but I just wanted to get it all out of the way, and considering they've been sitting on my table since winter time, it was time to go actually put them in the library. So if any of those sound good, or if you've read any of them, have any opinions or thoughts, let me know in the comments section. And until then, I will see you later. And more book reviews and the Yale University Press books to come relatively soon.